Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Sam, for inviting me. And thank you for Tomaskal and Associates building this incredible conference. How many of you all have been to the Bay Area Discovery Museum? Roughly half, maybe a little less. It's in Sausalito, as Lynn said, and it is sort of an unmuseum. It's widely outdoors. It's very open-ended, very experiential, and very hands-on in a learning environment. We serve about 300,000 young families a year, and we draw from all over the Bay Area, all 3 counties, a very diverse representation of the Bay Area population. And a few years ago, the museum realized that we had an opportunity to have a deeper impact in education and learning by creating the Center for Childhood Creativity, which works directly with educators and parents and thought leaders and researchers on influencing how we are engaging with children on this exact topic: how do kids learn? Our mission is to ignite and advance creative thinking for all children. I think that that is possibly why we earned an invitation to come and speak at this conference, since the theme this year is creativity. We also are backed by an incredible body of research. We have amassed about 600 studies about how kids learn, how their brains develop, how they learn to think. And we are backed by an incredible advisory board. The pictures here are just a sampling: Dr. Stuart Brown, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, Dr. Christine Carter, Dr. Ken Ginsberg, Dr. Allison Gopnik, Glenn Harvey, CEO of WestEd, Dr. Fumiko Hafe, Dr. Andrew Meltzoff, Dan Pink, who wrote A Whole New Mind and is a great thought leader on this topic of creativity in the workforce particularly, Mark Runco, who runs the Torrance Center for Creativity, and Yang Zhao. We also have partnerships with UCSF, UC Berkeley, Stanford. We live in a hotbed of academic institutions in the Bay Area. And what's incredible about the academic institutions worldwide is they know so much now about how children learn and how children develop. And in fact, the incredible explosion of brain research that has happened in the past 2 decades, because we now have all these non-invasive ways to look at how children learn, have actually validated the earliest educational theorists and philosophers about how kids learn, which is exactly what we're talking about all day today. Kids learn by being engaged. When their brains are stimulated, they are learning. And when they are bored, their brains start to fade and they stop learning. And so the opportunity here is to bring that research to all of the practitioners who are interacting with children all day long. And what's fantastic about this conference is the name of the conference, How Kids Learn, because in fact, the role that we play at a museum, like the Bay Area Discovery Museum, and you all play is in after school and out of school time, is very different than the role of formal education. And the reason that role is different, first and foremost, is that as an adult, by the time we are adults, we have spent 95% of our time in out of school environments. We spend very little of our time actually in formal school environments. And so we play a very important role in stimulating the learning for young children. And because we have that huge opportunity, we also have a big amount of freedom, because we are not confined by the same level of assessments, and we are not confined by the same level of standards that exist in the classroom, that exist in formal education. And our role should not be to offset whatever learning declines are happening in the classroom. Our role should be to create a different type of learning environment when they leave the classroom. And that provides a rich value in how kids learn, because we are engaging children. We just went to a conference last week, and the entire theme of the conference was how do we re-engage kids in learning. And this is an amazing opportunity where we can lead the charge in informal education and out-of-school learning environments to innovate how we are engaging with children, and thus lead innovation in the formal education environments as well. So what is creativity, the theme of this conference? It's most often associated with the arts. It's most often associated with the arts because creativity, as it's typically defined, is about generative creativity. It's about coming up with ideas. So you can imagine painting a canvas, composing a piece of music, writing a screenplay. Those are all sort of artistic creativity. But in fact, creativity is much more complex than just generative ideas. It is also the opportunity to criticize those ideas, to iterate on those ideas. And that is actually the blend of creativity. What we have now defined and what we talk about most often in education is creative thinking. Creative thinking is accessible to all of us. We are all creative thinkers. Our brains are designed to be creative thinking brains. Creativity is a little bit more of a fixed mindset. I am creative or I'm not creative. And then it becomes something that teachers and parents feel like they can't really access, like science. But in fact, if you think about it as creative thinking, where you can generate ideas and iterate ideas and execute ideas, you actually have an opportunity to be fluid in that state and that process. So let's make the case for creativity. Everybody's talking about it. It's in the mainstream media. It's on the cover of Newsweek magazine. And one of the reasons that that's happening is because of the workforce. There are two great studies, one by ABM and one by GE, which surveys roughly 3,000 of the world's top CEOs. And what they say is that the number one leadership competency required in the workforce right now is creativity and creative thinking. And in order to be competitive among nations, among corporations, you have to be innovative. The other thing that's happening is that LinkedIn, which is the number one professional network, where people are putting themselves forth and as a professional, creativity is now the number one skill that people define themselves with, which is hilarious because a few years ago, it wasn't even in the top 10. So everyone's trying to get on this wave, and the reason everyone's trying to get on this wave is because it's inherent in all of us. Of course we're all creative. I can say I'm creative. We can all say that we're creative. And so people are adding it into their LinkedIn profiles. There's the advent of the D school. Stanford started it, Northwestern followed, Harvard's following. There's a new book, The Rise of the DEO, the Design Executive Officer, written by one of our advisory board members. And so all of this shows that in the workforce is demanding creative thinkers and innovative thinkers, and yet our schools are not preparing them. And yet what's actually happening is that creativity scores are declining at a dramatic rate. My clicker's not working. There's a longitudinal study done by Torrance. It's been going on since roughly the 60s, and it tests for all facets of creativity, generative creativity, critical thinking creativity, and it's showing an alarming drop in creative thinking skills in the past 2 decades, and particularly in the past decade among primary school learners. There's been a precipitous drop in their ability to do well on these longitudinal tests. So what's happening? Why is that going away? And is creativity really a measure of success? Maybe this view of the CEOs and the workplace is too elitist for the populations that we all serve in the Bay Area. So another way to look at success is to ask Dr. Ken Ginsberg. I saw him speak recently at a affluent middle school parent night. And he asked the parents, how do you define success for your kids? And all the parents, college, 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 really good college, Harvard. And he said, well, okay, maybe, but what else? What's important besides college? Well, they've got to have a good job so they can keep this all going, right? They've got to get a good job. And he said, okay. But what Dr. Ginsberg is really passionate about are the underserved youth that he serves in Philadelphia. His mission is to support the most troubled teens in Philadelphia who are up against dire circumstances. And when he asks those parents, how do you define success for your kids? They say, I don't want them to get into jail or worse. And he says, okay, but what else? How would you define success? Well, maybe college. And to both of those audiences, he says, no, that's not how you define success. You define success for kids by saying when they are 35 years old, can they solve their own problems? Are they contributing meaningfully to society? And are they charting their own course? This is a very different metric to look at success in terms of what we are preparing our children to do. And the number one theme that ties all this together is if you're solving your own problems, and if you're creating meaningful things in our world, in our society, and you're charting your own course, then you are a creator. You have to have creative thinking skills to do these things. You have to know what questions to ask. So how do kids learn creative thinking? I'm going to back up to my own childhood to give you a little bit of a snapshot into my public school education on the East Coast. This is what my week roughly looked like. I had math. I had woodshop. I had metalworks. I had science. I had English and language arts. I had square dancing. I had art. I had chorus. Roughly half of the things that I engaged in as a child in my own education are now considered non-academic. They have been stripped from the public school system by and large, unless you happen to live in an affluent community where parents are funding those things that have been taken out. But what I remember from those courses, and when I think back to my formative years in formal education, I remember the pride of making that first pillow and sewing, geometry. I remember the persistence I needed to make the stool that I was building in woodshop stand up and not wobble, physics, math. I remember the awe of pulling back the bark on the maple tree and understanding where syrup came from and figuring out how to get the tap into the tree to get the syrup to come out with gravity. Science. I remember in drama writing my first play with my friends and putting it on. English language arts. But those things have all been taken out, and that is how kids learn. And the opportunity that you all have as out-of-school providers is to bring that back into the children's lives, because they need it. That's how they learn. There is good news, of course, and I'll take a brief diversion into the Common Core state standards. Bloom's taxonomy, many of you have probably seen this. This is the framework by which our education system is built upon. The old version, the top of the pyramid, was evaluation. Evaluation being at the top of the pyramid, the thing that we were striving for in our education system is what got us to No Child Left Behind. And we have now realized that perhaps evaluation is not the thing to strive for. Evaluation is perhaps not the thing that gets a kid to learn. And instead, we should be focusing on a new taxonomy, which has creating at the top of the pyramid. Creating is a fantastic thing to aspire for, given what we're talking about today. We want teachers to be able to create learning environments that empower and engage their children. We want children to be creating their own reality. We want children to be creating their own learning. So these are positive, this is positive momentum in the public education system. And of course, then we have the 21st century learning skills, the 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking. But right now they're frameworks, and the teachers are not yet empowered to teach this way. And that is a tide change that's going to come over the next decade, and you all can lead the charge because you have the freedom, going back to your role. You have more freedom in what you're providing in summer education and after-school education and what we provide in the museum and informal learning worlds. So to go back to how kids learn, I'm going to start talking about the brain, and I am not a neuroscience. Any of you who have read my bio know that. So I'm going to give you my layman's version of how our brains develop and how we think, how we learn to think. And I had this checked by my advisory board. It's actually legit, but it's very basic. So these are stars. There are billions of stars, as you know. Guess what? There are also billions of neurons in our brain. When we are born with billions of neurons. And the work of childhood and learning is to connect those neurons. Synapse formation, it's referred to, or neural pathways, neural networks. And the more we experience the learning, the more open-ended the learning is, the more those neural networks can form. So you can imagine, as an example, a close-ended opportunity to say to a child, what's 5 plus 5? I'm putting you on the spot, really. 10, right, you got it. So you can imagine left brain activity, one fact, right? Neuron to neuron, I made a connection. I have a fact in my brain. If instead we'd said to that child, what plus what equals 10? What plus what? There are infinite possibilities. I did this with my own daughter. And she started talking about, well, if there were 8 trees in the forest and you cut one down, there would be 7. If you had 2 more babies, there would be 7 people in our family. And she went on and on and on, and I could imagine her brain lighting up like a light bright board as she formed all of these synapses, all of these formations of neurons, because she was connecting her learning. That is how kids learn. So how do we create environments where that synapse formation is happening all the time? And that's the opportunity that for you all as you think about creating programs. So the number one thing, in order to create these types of learning environments for children where their brains are on fire, like a light bright board. How many of you played with light bright when you were children? See? All right. So if you didn't, try to get one on eBay. They're great. Child-directed is an important, obviously fundamental piece of learning. And again, formal education is less empowered to do this right now. But we can. We can ensure that we're tapping into a child's natural interests and desires, and particularly providing choice for that child. And that choice may be that for an avid reader, it's book time after school. And it may be for a high school science junkie that it's a bunch of experiments after school. And it may be for the very energetic young children, it's just football and tag and playing out in the playground after school. And it may be within 1 week that that same child does all of those activities. But choice is inherent in the learning, because if they have choice and then they are engaging in activities that they are directing the learning of, following their own curiosity, and they're motivated to learn. As soon as we start layering in external motivations, called extrinsic motivation, we start taking away that motivation for that child to be at the center of their own learning, because now they're trying to think about how to get the reward. And as soon as they start thinking about how to get the reward, there's more risk, because if they don't do what they're supposed to do, and they don't get the reward, that feels like failure. And so the second most important thing that you can do in providing programs and after school and summer opportunities for learning is to create risk-friendly environments. Our world has gotten so focused on finding the right answer, but as we just heard from Dale's talk, it's not about finding the right answer, it's about creating your own learning and being engaged. So how can you create environments that are risk-friendly? If you go back to just thinking like the basic human development, babies learning to walk. Now you would never create in a situation for a baby to learn to walk near a set of concrete steps. That is not the kind of risk we're talking about. But you also would not hold that baby's hands and walk them everywhere so they never learn to take their own steps. You would find a cushy living room rug with some furniture that they could pull up on, and they would be empowered to try it, and they would be empowered to fall and make mistakes and not get it the first time. And that's how they learn to walk. And you can take that exact same analogy of walking and apply it to every developmental phase that a child reaches throughout their education. How do you create environments that are risk-friendly? We don't get to hold hammers anymore in the public education system. Tag is actually being banned, I just heard, from a lot of public schools. That's like a natural human right to play tag, rich with development. But there's risk in it, and so it's being taken out in a lot of places. So what kind of environments can you create where risk is rewarded? And that mistake that happens, that iterating that happens, is a fundamental requirement to being a creative thinker. If you never take risks and if you never iterate, you're not making anything because you're fear of failure at all times. Experiential is such an enormous opportunity. Transmissive learning is happening over and over and over in the public school system where we are telling a learner, this is what I want you to know. But you need to experience the learning as a kid. You can give the book, a textbook about a worm, or you can let the child actually dig in the dirt and hold the worm. Experiential learning allows the 5 senses to be engaged, allows the whole body to be engaged. And when we engage a child's 5 senses, when we engage the child's right brain and left brain, when we engage the child's hands and body and mind in the entire learning process, they are engaged and they are learning. So experiential environments are incredibly important. The most important to me is active. The reason I'm up here having all this energy while you're all in the audience wondering if you need a 3rd cup of coffee is because I am moving right now. My arms are moving, my legs are moving, and those gross motor skills actually send blood and oxygen into my brain, so my brain is incredibly alert. We know from brain science that after about 15 minutes, the brain starts to slow down. It stops being quite as receptive to what people are saying and what you're trying to learn. So we know that kids in school and formal environments are sitting still for long periods of time and struggling with impulse control and thus behavioral issues. When they come to you after school, when they come to you for the summer, when they come to our museums, don't let them sit. Get them to move. One of the most important things about moving is that it reduces stress. And particularly in the more challenged socioeconomic environments, stress is becoming a really big problem because stress is actually influencing brain development. Our prefrontal cortex, which is the front of our brain here, is the least evolved of our brain. It developed last in human evolution. And because it developed last, it's most susceptible to nurture. It's most susceptible to the environment. And there are an amazing amount of new studies on the impact of poverty and stressful conditions on the development of the brain. So we are changing the course of their brain development by having them be in nonstop stress environments. But if you can give them that offset when they come to an after-school program, or they come to the summer, or they come to an informal learning environment where they can play and be free and use their body, you are actually diminishing their stress because it's gobbling up their cortisol and adrenaline. We were designed for fight or flight. We were designed that when that bear came, you had to make the choice of, am I going to use my adrenaline and cortisol to fight the bear, or am I going to run? But the kids can't run from the stress that they have. And so you need to give them the opportunity to run in their environment so they can run off of those chemicals and get those bad chemicals out of their brain and good chemicals back into their brain. And one of the best ways to do that is play. I already talked about tag. That's play. That's actually learning. They're learning social emotional skills there. When they play together, they're learning executive function skills. When they play together, when they do dramatic play, for example, and they're just doing dress up in kindergarten, they're learning how to create narratives. They're learning pre-literacy, language arts skills. Play is an incredibly important part of the development. And again, it's being taken out of the formal education, so how can you put it back in? You have the freedom to do that. The most important thing about play and being active is that it has a direct impact on brain development. I already talked about stress. But the other thing that it does is all mammals who play have bigger brains, true fact, bigger brains, more attuned brains, meaning their brains are more fine-tuned to understanding environmental inputs and processing, and more connected brains. Connected brains measured by how many neural networks have formed. So play actually really stimulates learning because it actually stimulates our brain, and our brain is learning. The last piece that's a really important building block to our ability to create creative environments for learning is time flexible. Again, this is something that the public school system has less freedom to do, although they're trying to figure out ways to do it, particularly in middle school and high school. New evidence that says that now takes the brain roughly 13 minutes to transition from one subject to another. So you rush from math, you've got a 5-minute bell, beeline down to English, sit still, go through the transition, and you're still trying to process math and start doing language arts. And we know it takes roughly 13 minutes to actually make that transition, but the school system right now is not set up to do that. You can do that. You can create environments where time-flexible learning is totally available. And again, the brain science behind this is awesome because when your brain enters a state of time-flexible engagement, you can enter this state called flow. Does anyone know about flow? Flow is a fantastic state where your brain literally goes into a different set of more or less sound waves, and you are so engaged in the activity that you are immersed in your learning, and your challenge to accomplish the activity actually perfectly aligns with your skills. It's a little bit of a stretch, but you can do it, and so you keep going and you keep tinkering. All of the children that we just saw in all the videos from the makers fairs, they were in a state of flow. That is a fantastic learning environment for the brain and for children to be really engaged in what they're doing. So in summary, I hope I have inspired you to see that you play a really important role in how kids learn, and particularly how kids learn to be creative and to be creative thinkers. You have the freedom to put all of these things into practice, and the public school system and the educators that we train in our professional development workshops all year long are struggling. They're dying to do this, but they have to work within the system to do it. And you have latitude. You can just start doing it. And in doing that, you are creating this incredible value because you are touching a child at their level of interest, engaging them in the learning, making them feel good about their learning. They don't even need to know that they're learning. And in doing all of this together, we create innovation for how the children are learning and for how the public school system is engaging kids and for how children learn to be creative and innovative themselves. Thank you very much.